Maria wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. It was only 9 in the morning, but she had already been working for 3 hours. The Hartley mansion had 42 windows on the first floor alone, and every single one of them needed to sparkle before the weekend. Mrs. Hartley had made that very clear. "I want this house to shine," she had said yesterday, not even looking up from her phone. "The gala is in 5 days, and everything must be perfect." Maria nodded like she always did. After 16 years of cleaning other people's homes, she had learned that the best response was usually silence and a smile. Words could get you into trouble. Hard work kept you employed. She moved through the grand hallway with practiced efficiency, her cleaning cart squeaking slightly on the marble floor. The Hartley house was the biggest one she had ever worked in. Sometimes, when she was dusting the library or polishing the dining room table that could seat 20 people, she thought about her own childhood home. 4 rooms, tin roof, dirt floor in the kitchen. Her entire village could probably fit inside this mansion twice over. But she didn't let herself think about home too much. It made her chest tight. The vacuum cleaner roared to life as Maria started on the carpets in the sitting room. Mrs. Hartley's 2 daughters walked past without acknowledging her. They were both in their 20s, always dressed in clothes that cost more than Maria sent home in 6 months. The younger one was on her phone, laughing at something on the screen. The older one carried a coffee cup that she would probably leave on some random table for Maria to find later. This was normal. Maria had learned long ago that to wealthy people, housekeepers were like furniture. Necessary but not really there. She didn't mind mostly. The Hartleys paid on time, which was more than she could say for some of her previous employers. They didn't yell at her or accuse her of stealing. Mrs. Hartley was demanding and particular but not cruel. It was a good job, as far as these things went. The real work began on Wednesday. Mrs. Hartley's annual charity gala was her pride and joy, the event she talked about all year long. Rich people from all over the city would come to donate money to whatever cause Mrs. Hartley had chosen this year. Maria wasn't entirely sure what the cause was. Something about children's education, maybe, or was it the arts? It didn't really matter. What mattered was that the house needed to look like something out of a magazine. Maria scrubbed floors until her knees ached. She polished silver until her reflection stared back at her from every spoon and fork. She washed crystal glasses so delicate she was afraid to breathe on them. Her hands were raw by Thursday evening, and she still had 2 full days of work ahead of her. But there was one room that Maria actually enjoyed preparing: the ballroom. Most people would probably laugh at the idea of a house having a ballroom, but the Hartleys had one. It took up the entire east wing of the mansion, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the garden. The ceiling was painted with clouds and angels like something from an old European palace. Crystal chandeliers hung from golden chains, and the floor was made of wood so perfectly polished you could ice skate on it, and in the center of it all sat the piano. It was a beautiful instrument. A grand piano so black and shiny it looked like it was made of liquid night. Maria had dusted it 1,000 times, always careful, always gentle. She knew it was worth more money than she would make in her entire lifetime. On Thursday afternoon, 2 men arrived to tune it. Maria watched from the corner of the room, pretending to clean the windows while they worked. One man played scales, adjusting things inside the piano that Maria couldn't see. The other one made notes on a clipboard. "Mrs. Hartley wants it perfect," one of them said. "The pianist she hired is supposed to be really good. For what she's paying, he better be," the other one laughed. When they finished and left, Maria was alone in the ballroom. The house was quiet. Mrs. Hartley had gone out with her daughters for lunch and shopping. Mr. Hartley was at his office, like always. The other housekeeper had left for the day. Maria stood in the doorway looking at the piano. Her fingers tingled. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat. She shouldn't. She knew she shouldn't, but her feet carried her forward anyway, across that perfect wooden floor, until she was standing right next to the instrument. Up close, it was even more magnificent. She could see her distorted reflection in its glossy surface. Very slowly, Maria reached out one finger and touched a single key. Middle C. The note rang out pure and clear in the empty ballroom, filling the space with sound. It was like a voice calling out to something deep inside her chest, something she had buried a long time ago. She pulled her hand back quickly, her heart racing. What was she thinking? If anyone saw her, If Mrs. Hartley found out she had touched the piano, she could lose her job. She needed this job. Her brother was in his final year of medical school. Her sister had just started her teaching career, but didn't make enough to help their mother yet. Everything depended on the money Maria sent home every month. She grabbed her cleaning supplies and hurried out of the ballroom, not looking back at the piano. But that night, lying in her small room on the third floor of the mansion, Maria couldn't sleep. She kept hearing that single note in her head. Middle C. So simple, but it had unlocked a flood of memories she had worked hard to keep locked away. She thought about Sister Catherine, with her kind eyes and patient hands showing a young Maria how to curve her fingers over the keys. She thought about the tiny music school in her village where she had spent every afternoon for 3 precious years. She thought about the feeling of playing Chopin for the first time, how the music had poured out of her like water from a spring. She thought about the day her father died, and how the music died with him. Maria turned over in bed, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin. Tomorrow would be another long day of preparation. The gala was only 2 days away. Mrs. Hartley would be even more demanding than usual. There would be no time for memories or foolish daydreams about pianos. But as Maria finally drifted off to sleep, her fingers moved slightly against the pillow, playing silent scales in the darkness. Some things, it seemed, never really went away. They just waited, patient and quiet, for their moment to return. Maria was 12 years old when she first heard piano music. Not from a recording or a tinny radio, but real music, played by real hands on real keys. She still remembered that day like it was yesterday. She had been walking home from school with her best friend Rosa, taking the long way through the village square to avoid the aggressive dogs near the shortcut. That's when they heard it. Music floating out from the old community center that usually sat empty and quiet. The girls had looked at each other with curious eyes and crept closer. Through the window, they saw a white-haired woman sitting at an upright piano. Her fingers moved across the keys like they were dancing, and the sound that came out was the most beautiful thing Maria had ever heard. "That's the new missionary," Rosa had whispered. "My mama said she came from somewhere in Europe. She's going to teach music." Maria had pressed her face against the window, unable to look away. The woman's eyes were closed, and she was smiling while she played. She looked like she was in a completely different world, somewhere peaceful and full of light. That night, Maria couldn't eat her dinner. Her mother had noticed, pressing a hand to her forehead to check for fever. "I'm fine, Mama," Maria had said. "I just heard the most amazing thing today." She told her parents about the music, about the piano, about how it made her feel like her heart was going to burst right out of her chest. Her father had smiled, that warm smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Why don't you ask if you can learn?" he had suggested. Her mother had frowned. "We don't have money for music lessons. We barely have enough for school supplies." "Just ask," her father had insisted. "The worst she can say is no," so Maria had asked. The next day, with her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it, she had knocked on the community center door. The white-haired woman had answered, and up close Maria could see that her eyes were blue like the sky. "Excuse me," Maria had said in her smallest voice. "I would like to learn piano, but I don't have any money." The woman, Sister Catherine, had studied her for a long moment. Then she had smiled and opened the door wider. "Come in, child. Let's see if you have the gift." Maria did have the gift. Sister Catherine said she had never seen anything like it. Within 3 months, Maria was playing simple songs. Within 6 months, she was reading music like other kids read books. Within a year, Sister Catherine was teaching her pieces that adults struggled with. "You have something special," Sister Catherine would tell her. "God gave you a rare talent, Maria. You must nurture it." Those 3 years were the happiest of Maria's life. Every day after school, she would run to the community center. Her fingers would find the keys, and for 2 or 3 hours she wasn't a poor girl from a struggling family. She was a musician. She was an artist. She was free. Sister Catherine never charged her a single coin. Instead, Maria helped clean the community center and organize the music sheets. It was a fair trade, and Maria would have done anything to keep learning. Her father would sometimes come to listen. He would sit in the back corner, his weathered hands folded in his lap, and watch his daughter play. Afterward, he would hug her tight and say, "My Maria, you're going to play in concert halls one day, in big cities, for important people. Maria would laugh and say, "Papa, don't be silly." But secretly, she believed him. She dreamed about it every night. Then came the day that changed everything. Maria was 13 when her father went to work at the construction site and didn't come home. There had been an accident. A wall had collapsed. 3 men were injured. 1 man died. That man was Maria's father. The funeral was small. The whole village came, but there was no money for anything fancy. Maria remembered standing by the grave, feeling like someone had reached into her chest and ripped out her heart. Her mother had cried silently, holding Maria's baby brother who was too young to understand. Her 2 other siblings, ages 8 and 10, had clung to Maria's dress. After that, everything fell apart quickly. Her father had been the only one working. There were debts Maria hadn't known about. Medicine for her grandmother. Loans for the house. Money borrowed from neighbors that needed to be paid back. Her mother got a job washing clothes for wealthier families, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough. One evening, about 2 months after the funeral, Maria's mother had sat her down at their small kitchen table. "Maria," she had said, and her voice was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, "I need you to stop the music lessons." Maria had felt those words like a physical blow. "But Mama, they're free. I don't pay anything." "I know, my love, but the time you spend there, you could be working. Mrs. Rodriguez needs someone to help in her shop after school. She'll pay a little. We need every bit we can get," Maria had wanted to argue. She wanted to scream and cry and beg, but she looked at her mother's exhausted face, at her siblings sitting in the corner sharing one small portion of rice, and she knew there was nothing to argue about. She worked at Mrs. Rodriguez's shop for 3 years. Then, when she was 16, a woman from an agency came to their village. She was looking for girls to work overseas as domestic helpers. The pay was good, much better than anything Maria could make at home. Her mother had cried when Maria said she wanted to go. "You're so young," she had sobbed. "I'm strong, Mama," Maria had replied, "and you need the money. The kids need to stay in school. They need to have better lives than us." The day before she left, Maria had gone to the community center one last time. Sister Catherine was still there, older now, her hair completely white. When she saw Maria, she had opened her arms. "I heard you're leaving," Sister Catherine had said. "I have to," Maria had whispered. "My family needs me." Sister Catherine had held her face in both hands. "Listen to me, child. What you have inside you, that gift, it doesn't go away just because you can't practice. It's part of your soul. One day you'll play again. I know it." Maria had wanted to believe her. But as the years passed, as she moved from one employer to another, as she sent money home month after month and watched her siblings grow up through photographs, the music seemed further and further away. She was 32 now. Her brother was finishing medical school. Her sister was a teacher. Her youngest sibling was in university. They had all succeeded because Maria had sacrificed everything, including her dreams. But sometimes, late at night in whatever small room she was given in whatever big house she was cleaning, Maria's fingers would move against her blanket, playing songs that no one could hear, and she would remember Sister Catherine's words, "One day, you'll play again." The day of the gala arrived with chaos that Maria had learned to expect. Mrs. Hartley was everywhere at once, her heels clicking rapidly across the marble floors as she barked orders at the catering staff, the florists, and anyone else within earshot. "Those flowers are wilting. Replace them immediately. The champagne glasses go on the left side, not the right. Maria, the chandelier in the entrance hall has a smudge. Fix it now." Maria nodded and headed for the ladder. Her feet ached already, and the guests hadn't even arrived yet. She had been awake since 5 in the morning, making sure every surface in the mansion gleamed. By 4 o'clock, the house looked like something from a fairy tale. White roses and orchids filled every corner. The chandeliers sparkled like diamonds. The ballroom floors shone so perfectly you could see the painted ceiling reflected in them. Everything was ready, everything except Mrs. Hartley's nerves. Maria was in the kitchen, helping arrange appetizers on silver trays, when she heard Mrs. Hartley's voice rising to a pitch that meant trouble. "What do you mean you can't come? This is completely unacceptable. I hired you 3 months ago." Maria peeked around the corner. Mrs. Hartley was on her phone, her face turning red. The catering manager caught Maria's eye and mouthed the word pianist. Maria's heart skipped a beat. "I don't care if you have the flu." Mrs. Hartley was practically shouting now. "You're a professional. You should have backup. You should have. Hello, hello? She stared at her phone in disbelief. He hung up on me. That insufferable man actually hung up on me. For the next hour, Maria watched Mrs. Hartley make call after call. Every pianist in the city was either already booked or wanted an outrageous fee for such short notice. One person agreed to come but then called back saying he had double booked and chose the other event. Mrs. Hartley finally gave up and told her assistant to set up the sound system for recorded music. But everyone could see she was devastated. This gala was supposed to be perfect, and live piano music had been the centerpiece of the evening's ambiance. By 6 o'clock, guests started arriving. Maria changed into her serving uniform, a simple black dress with a white apron. She tied her hair back tightly and prepared to become invisible again. The mansion filled with people wearing clothes that cost more than cars. Diamonds glittered at every throat. The men wore suits so perfectly tailored they looked like they were born in them. Everyone held champagne glasses and talked in voices that carried just the right amount of importance. Maria moved between them like a shadow, refilling drinks, collecting empty plates, opening doors. She heard fragments of conversations about yacht clubs and vacation homes in Europe. Someone was complaining that their personal chef had quit. Another person was discussing whether to buy their teenager a sports car or a luxury sedan. Different worlds, Maria thought. We live in completely different worlds. Dinner was served in the grand dining room. Maria helped serve course after course, each one more elaborate than the last. Mrs. Hartley sat at the head of the table, smiling and laughing, but Maria could see the tension in her shoulders. Every so often, her eyes would drift toward the ballroom where the piano sat silent. After dinner, the guests moved to the ballroom for speeches and donations. This was the main event, where Mrs. Hartley would talk about this year's charity cause and wealthy people would write large checks to feel good about themselves. Maria stood near the back, ready to refill drinks or handle any emergency. The recorded music played softly through the speakers. It was beautiful music, professionally recorded, but somehow it felt empty. The ballroom was too alive, too grand for canned music. Mrs. Hartley gave her speech about providing music education to underprivileged children. Maria felt a bitter twist in her stomach at the irony. These people were donating money to give poor kids music lessons while she, a woman who had once been exactly that kind of child, stood serving them drinks. The speech ended with applause. Mrs. Hartley smiled. But Maria could see disappointment in her eyes. Without the live piano music she had promised, the evening felt diminished. That's when Mrs. Hartley's son, home from college for the weekend, made everything worse. Kind of a boring party, Mom, he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. I thought you said this year would be special. This is just like every other charity thing. The music is lame. Several people turned to look. Mrs. Hartley's smile froze on her face. Maria saw her blink rapidly, fighting back tears of frustration and embarrassment. Well, the pianist canceled at the last minute, Mrs. Hartley said, trying to keep her voice light. These things happen. You had 3 months to plan this, her son continued, oblivious to the pain he was causing. Couldn't you find anyone else? Mrs. Hartley excused herself quickly and walked toward the windows, turning her back to the crowd. Maria saw her shoulders shake slightly. She was actually crying. Something inside Maria cracked open. Maybe it was seeing a powerful woman reduced to tears. Maybe it was the irony of an event about music education happening without music. Maybe it was her son's cruel words. Or maybe it was just that she was tired of being invisible. Tired of pretending she was less than she was. She thought about Sister Catherine's words from all those years ago. God gave you a gift. Don't bury it. Maria had buried it for 19 years. She had locked it away and tried to forget it existed. But standing there in that ballroom, watching Mrs. Hartley cry beside that beautiful silent piano, Maria realized something. The gift had never left. It had just been waiting. Her hands were shaking as she walked toward Mrs. Hartley. Every step felt like moving through water. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. What was she doing? This was crazy. She could lose everything, but her feet kept moving. Mrs. Hartley, she said softly. Mrs. Hartley turned, quickly wiping her eyes. What is it, Maria? I'm fine. Go back to your duties. Mrs. Hartley, Maria said again, and this time her voice was stronger. I can play the piano. Mrs. Hartley stared at her like she had spoken in a foreign language. What did you say? I can play the piano, Maria repeated. I can play for your guests, if you'll let me. For a long moment, Mrs. Hartley just looked at her, Maria could see the thoughts racing across her face. Confusion, disbelief, suspicion, and underneath it all, desperate hope. "You're serious?" Mrs. Hartley asked. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Hartley glanced at the piano, then back at Maria. "You understand that if you're wasting my time, if this is some kind of joke, there will be consequences?" Maria's throat was dry, but she nodded. "I understand. Just let me try, please." Mrs. Hartley studied her for another long moment. Then she made a decision. She straightened her shoulders, fixed her makeup with her fingers, and walked back toward the center of the ballroom with Maria following behind. Every eye in the room turned to watch as Mrs. Hartley led her maid toward the grand piano. The conversation stopped. Someone laughed nervously. Maria heard whispers starting to spread through the crowd like wildfire. "Is that the maid? What on earth is happening?" "This is bizarre." Mrs. Hartley's son stepped forward with a smirk on his face. "Mom, seriously? What are you doing? She probably doesn't even know what a piano is." More laughter. Maria's face burned. She wanted to turn and run, to go back to being invisible, to forget this moment of temporary insanity. But then she saw the piano. That beautiful black instrument that she had dusted and polished 1,000 times, and she thought about the 12-year-old girl pressing her face against a window, hearing real music for the first time. She thought about her father saying she would play in concert halls one day. She thought about all the silent songs she had played on pillows and blankets in the darkness. Maria walked to the piano bench and sat down. The crowd pressed closer, some curious, most amused, all of them expecting to witness an embarrassing disaster. Her hands hovered over the keys, and for a terrifying second her mind went completely blank. Then her fingers found their home, and Maria began to play. The first note silenced the laughter. It was a single, pure sound that rang out across the ballroom like a bell. Maria's finger pressed down on the key, and suddenly the room that had been full of whispers and mocking sounds went completely quiet. She didn't look at the audience. She couldn't. If she saw their faces, saw their judgment, she would freeze. Instead, she closed her eyes and let her fingers remember what her mind had tried to forget. The second note came, then the third. Her left hand joined her right, and suddenly she wasn't playing notes anymore. She was playing music. The piece was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Sister Catherine had called it Maria's soul song, the piece that fit her spirit perfectly. Maria had played it 1,000 times as a young girl, and her fingers remembered every phrase, every delicate turn, every moment where the melody soared and then fell like a bird riding the wind. The years melted away. She wasn't a maid anymore. She wasn't poor or invisible or less than anyone. She was just Maria, the girl who loved music more than breathing, whose fingers were meant to dance across piano keys. The ballroom transformed around her. The painted ceiling seemed to come alive, the angels in the artwork moving with the music. The chandeliers caught the light and threw sparkles across the walls in time with the rhythm. Even the flowers seemed to lean in, listening, but Maria noticed none of this. She was somewhere else entirely, in that small community center in her village with Sister Catherine sitting beside her saying, "Beautiful child, feel the music. Don't just play it, feel it," and Maria felt it. She felt every note in her chest. She felt the sadness of leaving her dreams behind. She felt the weight of 19 years spent cleaning other people's houses. She felt the love for her family that had made her sacrifice everything. She felt her father's absence, a hole that would never be filled. And she felt something else too, something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. The music swelled and softened, rose and fell. Her fingers flew across the keys with a confidence that came from somewhere deep inside her. This wasn't practice. This wasn't a performance. This was her heart speaking the only language it had ever truly known. When the final note faded into silence, Maria kept her eyes closed for one more moment. She didn't want to come back. She didn't want to face what came next. Then she heard it. A single clap. Then another. Then suddenly the entire ballroom erupted in applause. Maria's eyes flew open. 200 people were on their feet, clapping so hard their hands must have hurt. Some had tears running down their faces. Mrs. Hartley stood with both hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Even her son, who had laughed just minutes ago, was applauding with everyone else, his smirk completely gone. "That was incredible," someone shouted. "I've never heard anything so beautiful." A woman in a diamond necklace said to her husband, "Where did you find her?" Another guest asked Mrs. Hartley, who seemed too stunned to answer. Maria sat frozen on the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys. She couldn't believe what was happening. These people, these wealthy, important people who hadn't even seen her an hour ago, were applauding her for her music. For her gift, Mrs. Hartley finally found her voice. She walked over to Maria with tears still glistening in her eyes. "Maria, I had no idea. That was extraordinary. Would you please continue playing for us?" It wasn't an order. It was a request. Maybe the first real request Mrs. Hartley had ever made of her. Maria nodded, unable to speak. Her throat was too tight with emotion. For the next 2 hours, Maria played. She played everything she remembered from her childhood lessons. She played Beethoven and Mozart. She played a modern piece she had heard on the radio years ago and figured out by ear. She played songs from her homeland that made some of the guests cry. She played music that was happy and music that was sad, music that made people want to dance and music that made them want to sit in silence. Between pieces, guests gathered around the piano. They asked her questions. They wanted to know her story. "How long have you been playing?" a man in an expensive suit asked. "I learned as a child," Maria said quietly, "but I haven't touched a piano in 19 years. The crowd gasped. 19 years? That's impossible. You play like a professional. Where did you study? A woman with kind eyes asked. In my village. A missionary taught me for free because my family couldn't afford lessons. Why did you stop? Someone else wanted to know. Maria hesitated. Part of her wanted to keep her story private to protect the painful parts. But another part of her was tired of hiding. My father died when I was 13, she said simply. My family needed money. Music lessons became a luxury we couldn't afford. Eventually, I came here to work so I could send money home to support my siblings. They all went to school because of what I gave up. The ballroom went very quiet. These people who had everything were faced with someone who had given up everything for her family. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked moved. A few were openly crying. That's a beautiful sacrifice, the kind-eyed woman said softly. Mrs. Hartley's son approached Maria, and this time there was no smirk on his face. He looked embarrassed and ashamed. I'm really sorry for what I said earlier. About you not knowing what a piano was. That was stupid and mean. You're amazing. Maria looked at him, this boy who had never struggled for anything in his life, and she saw something real in his eyes. He was actually sorry. Thank you, she said. I accept your apology. The evening continued, but it was completely different now. Maria wasn't invisible anymore. People kept approaching her between songs. A gray-haired man introduced himself as a professor from the music conservatory. He gave her his business card. I'd like to talk to you about teaching opportunities, he said. We have a community outreach program that needs someone with your talent and your heart. A woman who introduced herself as a concert pianist said, I don't usually take on students, but I would be honored to mentor you. Your technique is rough around the edges, but your soul is pure. That's something that can't be taught. Another guest, a wealthy businessman, pulled Mrs. Hartley aside. Maria couldn't hear what they said, but she saw him write a very large check. Later, Mrs. Hartley told her that he had been so moved by her story that he tripled his donation to the music education charity. You've made this the most successful gala I've ever hosted, Mrs. Hartley said to Maria. People will be talking about this night for years, but the thing that surprised Maria most came near the end of the evening. The kind-eyed woman approached her again. She was carrying a glass of champagne and a small plate of fancy desserts. You've been playing for hours, the woman said, and I noticed you haven't eaten or drunk anything. Please take these. You've earned them. She handed Maria the champagne and desserts, treating her like a guest, not a maid. It was such a small gesture, but it made Maria's eyes burn with tears. For the first time in 19 years, someone at one of these events had seen her not as a servant, but as a person, as an equal. Maria took the glass with trembling hands. Thank you, she whispered. The woman smiled and raised her own glass. No, thank you. Tonight you reminded all of us what really matters. It's not about money or status or fancy clothes. It's about the gifts we're given, and whether we have the courage to share them with the world. You have that courage. Don't ever forget it. As the last guest left and the caterers began cleaning up, Maria sat alone at the piano one more time. Her fingers were sore. Her back ached. She was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical work, but she had never felt more alive. She played one final piece, just for herself. a simple melody that Sister Catherine had taught her in their very first lesson. It was a children's song, easy and sweet, but it reminded Maria of where she had started, of the girl she had been before loss and sacrifice had changed her path. Tomorrow, everything might go back to normal. Tomorrow, she might still be just a maid, but tonight, for a few precious hours, she had been a musician again. And now that the door had opened, Maria wasn't sure she could ever close it again. The morning after the gala, Maria woke up convinced it had all been a dream. Surely she hadn't really played the piano in front of 200 wealthy people. Surely they hadn't applauded her like she was someone important. But then she saw the business cards on her small bedside table. 3 of them. Real cards with real names and phone numbers. Professor Chen from the Music Conservatory, Elizabeth Wright, the concert pianist, and David Kumar, who ran a non-profit organization that helped adults continue their education. It had really happened. Maria got dressed in her usual uniform and went downstairs to start her morning work. But things were different. Mrs. Hartley was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee. She never came to the kitchen this early. "Good morning, Maria," she said, and her voice was gentler than usual. "Please sit down. We need to talk." Maria sat, her heart beating fast. Was she in trouble? Had Mrs. Hartley changed her mind about last night? "That was quite a performance you gave," Mrs. Hartley began. "I've been thinking about it all night. About you. About how you've worked in my home for 3 years. And I never knew anything real about you." She looked uncomfortable, like admitting this embarrassed her. "I want to offer you something," Mrs. Hartley continued. "A raise. A significant one. And different responsibilities. Perhaps you could give piano lessons to my daughters. They both took lessons as children but never practiced. Maybe you could inspire them the way you inspired everyone last night." It was a generous offer. More money would help her family. But something about it felt wrong to Maria. She would still be a maid who sometimes played piano. She would still be living in someone else's house, following someone else's rules, being grateful for whatever scraps of opportunity they threw her way. "Thank you, Mrs. Hartley," Maria said carefully. "That's very kind, but I need some time to think about it." Mrs. Hartley looked surprised. People didn't usually turn down her offers, even temporarily. But she nodded. "Of course. Take your time." Over the next few days, Maria made phone calls. The first was to Professor Chen. He invited her to visit the conservatory, and when she arrived, she felt like she was walking into a palace made of music. Students practiced in small rooms all down the hallways. The sound of pianos, violins, and voices filled the air. Professor Chen showed her the community outreach program. They needed someone to teach piano to children from low-income families, kids just like Maria had been. "The pay isn't much," he admitted, "but we provide housing for our teachers, and you would have access to practice rooms whenever you want. You could continue your own education while you teach." Maria felt something stir in her chest. Hope, real and solid. Next, she called Elizabeth Wright, the concert pianist. They met at a small cafe, and Elizabeth told her something that changed everything. "I was poor once too," Elizabeth said quietly. "Not many people know that. I grew up in a trailer park. My mother cleaned houses, just like you. A teacher at my school noticed I could sing and got me into a music program. That program saved my life." She looked at Maria with understanding in her eyes. "You have raw talent that most trained musicians would kill for. But you also have something more important. You have the lived experience of struggle. When you play, people don't just hear music. They hear your story. They feel your sacrifice. That's rare and precious." Elizabeth offered to give Maria lessons twice a week, free of charge. "I believe in paying it forward," she said. "Someone helped me when I had nothing. Now it's my turn to help you." The third call was to David Kumar. His organization provided scholarships and support for adults who wanted to change their careers. He told Maria about a program specifically for people in domestic work who wanted to transition to teaching or social work. "We help with living expenses while you study," he explained. "We connect you with jobs. We provide mentorship. The program lasts 2 years, and after that, you're qualified to teach music in schools or community centers." Maria listened to all of this, and for the first time in 19 years, she saw a path forward that wasn't just about surviving. It was about actually living. But there was one big problem. Her family still needed her money. Her brother was in his final year of medical school, and his expenses were high. She couldn't just stop sending money home. That night, Maria did something she hadn't done in years. She called her family on video chat instead of just sending her usual text message with the money transfer. Her mother's face appeared on the screen, older and more tired than Maria remembered. Behind her, Maria could see her brother and sister. "Maria, what a surprise. Is everything okay?" her mother asked worriedly. "Everything's fine, Mama," Maria said. Then she told them everything. About the gala, about the piano, about the opportunities that had suddenly appeared in her life. When she finished, there was silence on the other end. Then her brother spoke. "Maria, why didn't you tell us you still loved music? All these years, you never said anything." "Because you needed me to work," Maria said simply. "You needed the money." "We're not children anymore," her sister said, and her voice was firm. "I've been teaching for 2 years now. I'm making decent money, and I'm about to get a promotion. And I'll be a doctor in 6 months," her brother added. "I already have a job lined up at a hospital. The pay is good, Maria, really good." Her mother's eyes were filled with tears. "My dear daughter, you've taken care of us for so long. You gave up everything for us. Don't you think it's time we took care of you?" Maria started crying. She couldn't help it. For 19 years, she had carried the weight of her family's needs on her shoulders. She had never even considered that someday they might be strong enough to carry themselves. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "We're sure," her mother said firmly.
Chase your dream, Maria. It's been waiting long enough. 2 weeks later, Maria gave her notice to Mrs. Hartley. To her credit, Mrs. Hartley didn't seem surprised.
She wished Maria well and even gave her a generous severance payment. "You taught me something important," Mrs. Hartley said on Maria's last day. "You taught me that we never really see the people who work for us. We see uniforms and functions, not human beings with dreams and talents. I'm going to try to do better." Maria moved into a small apartment near the conservatory. It was tiny, just one room with a kitchen barely bigger than a closet. But it was hers. For the first time in her adult life, she had her own space. She started teaching piano to children 3 days a week. The other days, she studied with Elizabeth and took classes at the conservatory. It was hard. Some days she was so tired she could barely stand. She was older than most of the other students, and sometimes they looked at her strangely when she struggled with music theory that they had learned as teenagers. But every time she sat at the piano, every time her fingers touched the keys, she remembered why she was doing this. She remembered that 12-year-old girl pressing her face against a window. She remembered her father saying she would play in concert halls one day. She remembered Sister Catherine telling her that her gift was part of her soul. 6 months after leaving the Hartley mansion, Maria gave her first real recital. It was small, just a showcase for the community outreach program teachers. But the room was full. Her students came with their parents. Elizabeth came. Professor Chen came. Even Mrs. Hartley showed up sitting in the back row with her daughters. And on the video call that Maria had set up on a tripod, her family watched from thousands of miles away. Her mother, her siblings, and even some of her old neighbors from the village crowded around the screen. Maria walked onto the small stage wearing a simple black dress. Not a maid's uniform this time, but a performer's dress that Elizabeth had helped her choose. She sat at the piano and looked out at all these faces, people who believed in her, people who had helped her, people who loved her. She began to play the same piece she had played at the gala. Chopin's Nocturne, her soul song, but this time it sounded different. This time there was no fear in the music, no hidden pain. This time the music was pure joy, pure gratitude, pure hope. Because Maria wasn't playing as someone trying to prove her worth. She was playing as someone who had finally found her way home. When the last note faded, the applause was just as loud as it had been in that grand ballroom. Maybe louder, because this time it came from people who truly knew her. After the recital, one of her youngest students ran up to her. She was 7 years old, from a family as poor as Maria's had been. "Miss Maria," the little girl said, "when I grow up, I want to play piano just like you." Maria knelt down and looked into the child's hopeful eyes. She thought about Sister Catherine, who had seen potential in a poor village girl. She thought about all the people who had helped her along the way. And she thought about how one moment of courage could change everything. "You will," Maria told the girl. "I promise you will. And I'll be right here to help you. Because that's what gifts were for, not to be buried and hidden away, not to be sacrificed and forgotten, but to be shared, to be passed on, to light the way for others walking the same dark path. Maria had spent 19 years invisible. But now finally she could see herself clearly. Not as a maid, not as a sacrifice, but as what she had always been deep down in her soul. A musician, a teacher, a woman who had found her voice again, and she was never going to be silent again.